I think one of the best decisions that I got in my life was to choose to become a journalist. And after choosing becoming a journalist was the decision to become exclusive, which is always a dream, a wet dream of any journalist to become exclusive. Unfortunately, I'm always exclusive in Israeli media, which many journalists might envy, but it has a price, as you may imagine yourself. And it was back in the 80s when I started to travel to the occupied territories. Until then, I was really a good boy, Tel Aviv, and I was brainwashed like all the other Israelis, and I had the same beliefs, the same convictions. And only in the late 80s I started to travel to the occupied territories, and gradually, I'm always asked, what was the moment? There was not one moment. It was a gradual process when I realized that the biggest drama is taking place in this dark backyard of Israel, that the Israelis don't want to know anything about it and know very little about it, and that the Israeli media is totally betraying its mission by not covering it, or by covering it in a totally biased way, recruited way. Israel media is a free media. Almost no governmental censorship, very limited, very little. But we suffer from something which is 10 times worse, and this is self-censorship. And this self-censorship has nothing to do with ideology. It has only to do with commercial considerations and fears, not being courageous enough. And it's almost a wall-to-wall coalition in Israel of writers and readers and publishers and editors and government and military and secret services and you name it, not to tell the real story, to keep this society living in denial, to keep this society being totally disconnected with reality, to keep this society in its blindness, moral blindness, and to collaborate with the occupation, because it serves everyone's interests. And here we have this phenomena in which the Israeli media voluntarily became the biggest collaborator, in my view, with the occupation. Because I truly believe that if the Israeli media would have not betrayed its mission, if the Israeli media would be really professional, it's not about politics, it's about being professional. Would you really tell the real story? I give the credit to the Israelis that at least part of them would not be so apathetic and so indifferent, and the occupation would have come to its end long time ago. But the media enable us this luxury of claiming we didn't know. If one day we will be asked, we will say we didn't know. We really didn't know that all this was happening on our behalf. Nobody told us. And to this niche I try to enter, and my newspaper, which is unfortunately the only newspaper in Israel today, the only newspaper that can be called newspaper, and not propaganda, and not brainwash system. We try to fall into this niche, but it's quite an impossible mission, because you stand in front of this entire machinery of brainwash, entire coalition in which people don't want to tell and don't want to know. And it's very hard to break this vicious circle, almost impossible. And in the recent years, it's also becoming not only unpleasant, but in certain cases even dangerous. 1.5 years ago, I even needed bodyguards, until I realized that they by themselves are settlers, and they became pleasant to work with.
It's better to be without them.
Exactly. But in any case, it's not only about safety, it's about, and this will be my last remark for the opening, in recent months and years, I start to ask myself if my freedom, which is total, until now my freedom is really total, I can't complain. Freedom of speech, freedom of movement. I can't go to Gaza, but no Israeli is allowed to Gaza, unfortunately, which is very damaging my work. But except of this, I can really express any view, and I'm doing so. But in those months, in those last year or two, I start to ask myself, can this be taken for granted? Because the cracks in Israeli democracy for its Jewish citizens, even those cracks are getting more and more serious. You see, and I never before used the term fascism about Israel, but you see the recent months, symptoms of fascism that cannot be described, cannot be defined, but fascism, witch hunting. It didn't touch me personally yet directly, but I feel it's on its way, and I start to think that what I take for granted, what I took for granted until now, that at least as long as Haaretz exists and I am there, our voice will continue to be raised. I have the feeling, and not only me, in the recent months, that nothing should be taken for granted. And they started with the NGOs, they continue with artists now. I'm sure that journalists will be the next one in the line. And then it will be a new game in town, and I don't want to think about this moment. Until then, I will, and my newspaper obviously will, continue with a very deep conviction that we are doing what journalists should do, and we will continue and not shut up. Thank you.